A few weeks ago when we gathered here in St Gabriel's, we heard the story of Samuel's mother, whose name is Hannah. And Hannah prays and prays and prays for a child because she's often denied a child. That through her life she's not been able to have a child. And in those days, that was a source of shame, a source of cultural embarrassment. But eventually she is able to have a child who is Samuel. And in response, she dedicates that child to God. She is so thankful for him that she says, "This child now belongs to you, God." She makes a huge sacrifice. And in Samuel's case, that means that the child not only sort of theoretically belongs to God, just as we say with Malachi and Sufria today, we offer this child, God, to your keeping and your care. But actually, very practically for Hannah, it meant her son left her home, and her child went to live with Eli the priest, who is also mentioned in this story. So we hear a story of Samuel, a young boy, living in the temple area with Eli the priest, and hearing in the night a voice calling to him. And so I just want to offer very simple and brief thoughts today on this day of baptism for Sufria and Malachi, and maybe for each one of us, an invitation into the deeper and important discipline of listening. And the first thing I want to invite us to think about is how listening to God and discerning the voice of God is a practice that takes time, it takes skill, it takes effort, it takes discipline. So Samuel is asleep, and he hears someone calling to him. The Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here I am." And we might think if we stop there that Samuel heard God and thought, that is the voice of God. But he didn't. Samuel ran to Eli, to the human being who was near him, and said, "What is it? You called for me." This, I think, is what any of us would do if we think we heard an audible voice speaking. We would imagine it's someone with whom we share a room or a space. So Samuel goes to Eli and says, "What is it that you want?" And Eli says, "I didn't call you." I don't know if he's irritated and having been woken up, but he says, go back to sleep, I didn't call you. And so Samuel goes back and lies down. But then when he lies down, again he hears Samuel. And Samuel gets up and goes back to Eli and says, "Here I am, what is it that you want?" And Eli says, "I didn't call you. I don't know what's going on, but go back and lie down." And Samuel goes back and lies down, and a third time hears a voice, and this time recognizes that maybe this isn't a human voice. Maybe this is the voice of God. People who hear the voice of God sometimes hear it very dramatically, out of nowhere, and instantly know that it is God. More often, it takes a lifetime of listening and attending and learning to recognize what is actually from God and what is a voice from the world or from our own hearts or from the many distractions that surround us. How can we tell that it's God? We might need to ask ourselves, is this voice inviting me into more love, into greater kindness, into generosity or sacrifice? Then it might be God. Is this voice challenging me to be better than I already am, to step into a new place, to offer service or kindness or grace to someone? Then it might be God. But if this voice is calling me to do something which might hurt others or harm others, or is entirely focused on my own growth or well-being, entirely focused on that alone, never seeking to look to the needs of others, perhaps that voice is coming from me. To practice listening to the voice of God, we have to make space for it. We live in a very noisy and crowded world. It's hard to listen to the voice of God because there are so many other voices in our lives, and each of us here listen to other people all the time. Perhaps you listen to friends and family, not suggesting that you shouldn't. Perhaps we also listen to other media that crowds out our mind. Perhaps we are rarely silent. If we want, like Samuel, to grow and learn how to listen to God, we have to do that by creating space in order to do it. We have to sometimes silence the other voices that might fill our hearts and minds. Maybe occasionally turning off the radio. Maybe allowing ourselves just a few moments alone where no one else can find us, and opening ourselves up to what we might hear. Malachi and Cyprian, I pray, will be people who listen. Because if they learn to listen, to create spaces of silence, they may hear the voice of God. The second invitation is just to recognise that when you listen, things change. When we listen, life does not stay the same. We can't tell from this little portion of the text that we read, but the reality is that Eli the priest, in whose place Samuel is living, is not a good man. He's a bad person. He's sort of fallen dim in his faith, he's tired, he's not listening to God, and he lets his sons run wild. And by wild, I mean they assault people, they are corrupt, they are really not living well in the world, and Eli just lets that happen. What happens when Samuel hears God is that all begins to change. When Samuel hears God, it marks the end of Eli living as he's been living. It marks the end of Eli's power and control in Israel and the beginning of a better way of being. It's a very dramatic shift and change. But it's true for all of us that unless we listen and attend, unless we are open to what we might hear, both from others and from God, nothing changes. What the world needs is for us to be open and attentive to what the voice of God might be saying, and perhaps what others, through whom God is working, are saying to us. If we leapt ahead to our gospel reading, much later, we hear the story of Nathanael. Nathanael, who becomes a disciple of Jesus, but who is deeply sceptical about who Jesus is. So here is Nathanael thinking, who is this Jesus? I'm not interested in him. He comes from Nazareth, and there's an old joke that nothing good comes out of Nazareth. So I'm not particularly interested in what this man has to say to me. I wonder if any of us have ever thought, I'm not interested in what this person has to say to me. But by Nathanael's friends saying to him, come and see, and by this encounter with Jesus, Nathanael's life is entirely changed. He learns a new way of being and a new way of living. I pray that we will teach our children, Malachi and Cyprian, and all our children, how to listen. And we will do that because we too have learned to listen. We've learned to listen to different voices, challenging voices, opposing voices, people who have to make us curious, have to make us think, people who invite us to explore new ideas, so that we might grow as people and our lives might be changed. The final thing to say is that unless we listen, we don't find out our true purpose in life. If Samuel had slept through that story, if he'd just slept, heard a voice and thought, I must be dreaming, or heard a voice and thought, I can hear it, but it's the middle of the night, I'm not going, I'm tired, I'm going to sleep through, then what we would not have is the rest of our story. And Samuel is crucial in the story of the calling of King David. You might know him from the killing of the giant Goliath. David, who is the ancestor of Jesus. The whole story hangs together because Samuel heard and Samuel responded. Unless we listen, we do not discover the calling of our lives, the purpose, the meaning, the place where we are meant to be. And for Malachi and Cyprian, we're not just trying to tell them today that they are loved. We're not just promising to show them and teach them a set of values by which they can live, but we're trying to show them that for both of them, God has purpose and meaning in their lives, that He has called them to be who they are and who they are becoming, and to serve and live in the world in a way that makes a difference, so that the world is never the same again because of them and because of who they are. And so I pray that we will be better listeners, each one of us, helped by the Spirit of God. We will make time and space to hear his voice so that we can respond and recognize him. We will listen so that we can be changed, the world can be changed, and perhaps others can be changed through us. And we listen so that we might discover our true purpose and calling in life.